12:33. I'd like to call the meeting of the Optional Forms of Government Study Commission to order. First item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I believe you all have a copy of the agenda in front of you. Is there any discussion of the agenda? I see no discussion. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Move to approve.
Okay. Brian has moved to approve the agenda. Is there a second? Ken has seconded. Call for a vote. Show of hands. Dave, are you going to identify the people? Please hold your hands up.
Everybody's voting.
Is it? Let's see if there's any objection. It was unanimous.
Okay.
I'd like to take a moment to address this commission. We've been tasked to decide if the current form of government is the most efficient and effective option available to the county. To that end, we need to understand our current form of government and the decisions to be made. The commissioners' jobs are administrative, legislative, and quasi-judicial. We've been told they're having approximately 400 meetings per year. If you look at the amount of time required to prepare for every item on the agenda for 400 meetings, they're overloaded. There are two primary decisions we need to make as a commission. The first is, should we recommend relieving the commissioners of some of their administrative functions? The second is, should we increase the number of commissioners? There are 12 ancillary decisions put forward in the statutes. There are 6 row officials: the county clerk, county treasurer, the county assessor, the county sheriff, the county coroner, and the prosecuting attorney. The questions that we are being asked to answer for those 6 row positions: should they be elective or should they be appointive? In addition, we have the county clerk and the county treasurer. We're being asked whether to leave those offices as single offices, or because they wear multiple hats, to divide those into 2 or even 3 offices. Among the county assessor, sheriff, coroner, and prosecuting attorney, we're being asked whether it's best to leave those 4 offices or to consolidate any number of those offices, eliminate one or more, and combine their efforts into another office. Every question, every subject we raise, every witness we talk to, we should be directing all of that toward answering these 14 questions. With that statement, I'd like to open announcements. Nancy, would you like to handle the first announcement? Not yet.
Is that better? There we go. Actually, so the first one is the roster.
Yes.
And that is currently circulating to the group. As it comes to you, if you would complete whatever contact information you would like shared with the other members of this group, we'll get that updated and handed out at the next meeting. For the purposes of the website, typically what we do is just list the names of the members of the group and your email address associated with this group. None of the rest of that will be distributed widely. It's just for use of these members so that you can reach each other. Email and phone.
Thank you, Nancy. I heard some complaints from our last meeting. Several people talked to me, and I went online and I observed the recording. When we're having the meeting, in many cases, because we're close enough together, we could hear one another easily, and we weren't speaking into the microphones. The complaint was that people could see gestures and everything was going on, but there wasn't a sound coming out. When I looked at the recording, I saw that same information, that there were sections that we could see that somebody was actually speaking, but there wasn't a sound. So I'd like to remind everybody, please, when you're speaking, speak into the microphone. You can hear the tone change when you're speaking into the microphone and when you're not. So just kind of listen for that and make sure you're being picked up by the mic. If you're not, move the mic around, get a handheld, whatever it takes, because we want people to be able to hear what we're saying. There's a time crunch on this. We're not a standing committee. We can't take all the time we want. This commission's a project, and it needs to be managed as a project. We can't have a regular weekly meeting just designed to create camaraderie within an organization. Hopefully camaraderie will develop, but it's not our purpose. We have a limited time to produce a product. We need to meet milestones on a schedule in order to achieve our purpose. And Brian has put together a fairly good report on what those milestones will be. Last week, we decided to increase the number of members participating in our discussions to 12, so that all can have input and be heard. We also decided to limit our weekly meetings to 90 minutes. Since we must deal with more than one thing on an agenda in most of our meetings, we're going to need to limit the time for each agenda item so that we can complete an agenda and fulfill our milestones for the meeting. As Tamara said last week, we need every voice to be heard. In order for each participant to be heard, we'll need to limit our comments. To give each of the 12 of us time to comment, some math. 20 minutes is 1,200 seconds. Divide by 12, that's 100 seconds each to speak. That's 1 minute and 40 seconds. 10 minutes is 50 seconds each. 5 minutes is 25 seconds each. Personally, I feel this is too limiting, but it is the consequence of the decisions made by this commission last week. It may seem strange for an action item to appear in the announcements, but it was to give the commission a chance to discuss and, if desired, to change the decision made last week. I'll open this topic to limited discussion and, if desired, to motions to discuss the parameters. Any discussion? Ken? Here.
Sorry, this mic doesn't want to turn on. Yeah, that works. I think that's a little oversimplified analysis. I think that on any given point that it's unlikely that all 12 people would want to comment. So while I appreciate the forethought, I don't think we need to worry overly about it as long as we keep an eye on the clock as we go through.
My concern is, in many cases, you're right. Not everybody's going to want to speak. But if everybody does want to speak, we can't have one person take up 5 of the 20 minutes and then not give time for the others. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to set some parameters on how long we want each agenda item to be on the floor. And when somebody has had their time and we have nobody else wanting to speak, I'm fine with going back to the same person again. So if everybody's in agreement with that, kind of keep your first comments to the point. And if you want to make more comments, and I believe Ken's right, most of these, not everybody's going to want to speak, then that's okay. Come back and we'll come back to you. But I just want to be sure that everybody who wants to speak gets a chance. Tamara was right about that last week. Okay?
So just to clarify, going forward, when the agenda will have some estimated time going forward, so that we'll know in advance that this item is a 30-minute item, this item is a 15-minute item. That way, at least we have some recognition, and in the beginning of the meeting, we could always go and see if we need to adjust the time and defer some items if some other item has priority.
Yeah, I think that's appropriate to have some time estimates.
I agree wholeheartedly. What I was planning on is giving Brian about 5 minutes to present his report. Talking about the current county structure, if we're interested in doing so and don't want to just table that, give that about 15 minutes. The bylaws are the big issue tonight. 20 minutes to talk about the template, 20 minutes to actually discuss changes. 6 minutes to list the potential candidates for interviews. 10 minutes to discuss next week's agenda. And we're at 95 minutes. We were looking for about a 90-minute meeting. That's about as decent as I could get on that.
I do think there's a little bit of overlap between Brian's proposal, because he does call out potential interviewees in that schedule, with your separate item of people we want to interview, so.
Yeah, I agree. But we're going to look at it. For example, I had some suggestions. Kristen, where were you? Had a good suggestion about looking at other governmental entities. She was talking about that. Kristen?
Right. In particular, I was thinking of other counties, not necessarily in Idaho, since we're the first county to go through this process, just to get an idea of structures that are similar to the ones that we're looking at and how they feel they're working. And I would be willing, I don't know how exactly to do this within this group, but if there's some research that needs to be done and brought back to the group, I would be happy to take the lead on that.
Thank you. It looks like we're through discussing this issue. Let's move on to the approval of the minutes. Any discussion on the minutes? Nancy? I did note one thing on the minutes that I didn't get back to you on. You say you called the meeting to order at 5:02.
I apologize for that. That would be what happens when you use a previous set of minutes as a template. So I will get that fixed. Thank you.
Other than that change, discussion? I see no interest in discussing it. Motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the amended minutes.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Yes. Call for vote. Show of hands. It looks like it's unanimous. Minutes are approved. Brian, you have the floor. Please speak into a microphone, Brian. Sorry about that.
If any of you need to turn your microphones on, the bottom left-hand button, if you press and hold that, should turn that on.
Hopefully the audio is coming through. Now I can hear it. Great. So each of you should have in front of you a colored table. It's got various shadings. Page 1 is shaded green. This is a discussion draft that I created per direction last week from the study commissioners. And it's to take a stab at a schedule based on the assumption that it would take us a year to get through to our endpoint.
Brian?
Yeah.
It's very directional on mic. You'll almost have to eat the mic.
Okay. Be like the wedding singer.
There you go.
Here. Okay. I'll hold it like that. So let me just break it down the way I think of these things. I did it in reverse chronology, but it's presented starting with our first meeting on the 11th of May this year. And I look at what we're doing is, as a study commission and the direction given to us under the applicable code provision for study commissions, as our functions are basically information gathering, then discuss that information, and hopefully out of those discussions comes a consensus of sorts that leads to action, which rolls over to the second page of this, and it's shaded in pink or salmon. And that action is basically, do we recommend a change in government or not? If we don't, then that's that. But if we do, then we have to write it up and explain it per the requirements of the applicable statute for study commissions. And so moving forward from that pink into the more darker salmon-colored part of the table here, we get into writing and finalizing that very decision. And it's, if you look back at the 1996 or 97 Study Commission recommendation report, they had it broken into exactly the same sections that the statute requires. So that's what's envisioned here, writing and finalizing. is putting together that very report. And then, you know, that leads to some thinking about it. I've built in a lot of time to write it, circulate it amongst ourselves, and think about it, and have a nice Christmas and New Year's, and come back and finalize and put it out there for the required public hearing. But I've built in something different here, which is hopefully not objectionable, which is put it out there for a 60-day review and comment period for the public, so there's plenty of time, and we're not doing it like before Christmas, which would really annoy a lot of people. I purposely built it in so this would be after Christmas, in the new year, we're all fresh. And we have 60 days, and then at that 60th day would be the actual public hearing, which is the requirement under the statute. You have to have a public hearing. So this goes an extra measure by having a comment period. You could receive written comments within the 60 days too. Along that time period, what I was thinking might be a good idea, and I just put it out for consideration, is perhaps some public outreach and education about what the report is. So once we put it out there for the 60 days comment, what's shaded in the light blue here is public outreach and education, to talk to the public about what the decision was and how it was written up, and educate. Because I have an assumption that I'm working from, could be incorrect, but maybe one of the reasons the public didn't go the last time for the recommended change was people didn't know. There wasn't a public outreach education component, especially I think in the 2012. I think that was just the commissioners put it on the ballot. Now I could be wrong about that, I'm making an assumption, but it just seems that you're going to need that if you're going to talk to people about voting on changing the structure of their government, if that indeed is what people recommend, right? You need to talk to them about it. So I built that in here. And then lastly, you have the public hearing. You take comments at that as well. You factor those into your final draft and come up with the very final draft. And then you take action on it in the gray here, April 13th, 2022. And you vote and you submit it to the commissioners. So those are the categories that I've broken this down into color-wise. One thing I'd like to maybe, that picks up on a thread of the next part of the agenda, I think, is inviting folks in to talk to us about perspectives. And I've built that into this chart in the green up front, the information gathering section. And if we like, we can go through that. But very simply, I was thinking a good idea would be to start at the next meeting with a presentation that briefly gives an overview of the 96-97 Study Commission report recommendations. Reviews the history since then, like the 2012 Kootenai County Commissioners, all government forms and ballot and outcome, and then some interviews of people that were involved in that, just to hear what those people, what their perspective was at the time, to understand what that was, and try to understand what happened. The next meeting would be a presentation on, and this was June 9th, the 5th meeting, on the Idaho Code provisions regarding alternate forms of county governments, because I think as a commission, we owe it to ourselves to educate ourselves a bit about what are the allowable forms. You can't just pick any government form. So the statute lays out the available forms. I also think it's really good for the public to be along for that discussion. I think there could be misperception about what people can and cannot do under Idaho Code, and I think it would be informative. It brings people along, in the public along. And as part of that, just a discussion about efficiencies, transparencies, et cetera, that are attendant to these various forms, just a discussion about that. The next meeting, kind of 7th meeting, this is June 23rd, presentation that goes into an overview of roles and duties of the county assessor and clerk. And I'm breaking these down as these are the line positions, breaking it down. I skipped one, I'm sorry, June 16th. That's here from the current commissioners, right? First, give a presentation. We know in the statute and in the county government handbook what the roles and duties are of the commissioners. A quick presentation on what those are, gives a common understanding, and have the commissioners in to have a discussion with us about what they do, what they see as their challenges, and what they see as could be improvements. Have that Q&A and discussion. And in like fashion, move into the next meeting, June 30th. That's the one I'm sorry, June 23rd. That's the assessor and clerk. And it's the same format. Give a little overview of what they do, then interview them, and then have a discussion around that. And then so on the next meeting, roles and duties of the coroner and treasurer, a little overview, interviews, and then discussion. And then it wraps up with the county assessor and county clerk at the next meeting. Same kind of format. Overview of roles and duties, interviews, and discussion. The next meeting, the 10th meeting, July 14th, what I thought would be, and these aren't written in stone, these are suggestions. Do we want to hear from academics, like at the University of Idaho or School of Law or the college, that know something about government structure in Idaho and have studied it and know the peer-reviewed literature and the pros and cons? Perhaps that's a helpful perspective that people want to hear from. Other idea at the next meeting, perhaps National and/or Idaho Association of County Administrators, hear from them. These would not be the exclusive thing for the agenda, and it's not necessarily in this order. I'm just putting ideas in here, filling them in.
Yeah.
And also hear from the City of Coeur d'Alene administrators and managers, because they're right next door, right within the county, and there is kind of a, you know, there's different management forms in cities. Sometimes it works well to have that kind of manager, executive role in a city, but not in counties. And there's some literature that is out there on that kind of thing. It might be good to understand a city's perspective. What do they see? Also, just to give, you know, a nod to the respective Democratic and GOP central committees, perhaps we should hear from them. I don't know. These are just ideas. I also picked up on some names that I'd heard through the grapevine, so to speak, of individuals that might be good, and I've filtered them in here. I heard a name, I think it was Dina Darrow, that appears under the 14th meeting. I gather that may be a person who's good with cost efficiencies, that may help us in terms of evaluating that under various forms of government. And perhaps that's not the person, but perhaps we want someone with that kind of a skill set that comes in and can evaluate all forms of government as provided under the code, and tell us what the perhaps, you know, benefits and not benefits of, from a cost perspective of that in today's, you know, current government milieu, if you will. So that takes us through this part of the agenda where it was like you were going to get into people who might be candidates to come in. I didn't mean to take up that whole discussion, but I had heard some things and I just put them in here, and I think that helps jumpstart it a little bit. So I'll just shut up for now. Thanks.
I think I want to thank you, Brian. I think you've done a masterful job here in putting this together. I want to make one comment. It's my understanding that the audio will be being revamped the week of the 16th, week of the 14th, however you want to phrase it. We will not probably be able to meet here and be broadcast publicly that 16th. So we probably will have to look at revising this just a little so that we can get everything done, but not be doing it when nobody can watch us on video. Open for discussion. Ken?
Yeah, actually it's Kurt, but.
I'm sorry, Kurt, I
That's okay.
apologize.
Yeah, thank you, Brian, for putting all of this together. Two things stand out to me. One is we don't have to take the whole year. So I don't think we need to make extra work for ourselves if possible. It may not be possible. But the other thing is that there's no room for public comment until after we make a decision, after we draft things. And I think we would, well, betoken the interest in the community by having public sessions earlier, even if it means an extra meeting outside of the Wednesday nights or something. I am also a little concerned that we're going to have all three commissioners crammed into one meeting, and it might be better to spread that over two.
Any other discussion?
Yeah.
Go
If
ahead.
I could, please. It was a lot of work, Brian. You really did a great job. And as long as this is a format, there's not one locked into it, you know, that's fine. The 1997 report was an excellent report. I'm not saying I agree with the resolution, but it certainly would like to know why, with everything they did, it was still just totally voted down. And talking to people, I think would be wonderful, you know, to do to kind of get that perspective. Why was it defeated? But I tend to think, and I think you were alluding to, there was not enough public output, not enough public involvement. And I think, as Kurt was saying, we need to kind of focus some on that. And I don't know there's so much as a public crowd here as much as maybe we need to make some presentations in different groups. The chamber, the Rotary, you know, I don't know, you guys probably know, women probably know better than me some of these groups. But I think we need to be out there, not just sitting here waiting for it to come to us.
I think there's one correction I want to make on that. I don't believe the 97 was voted down. It's my understanding that the county commissioners, under the statute, refused to put it on the ballot. The 2012 was not a commission. The county commissioners put that on the ballot themselves, and it was voted down. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize, but that's my understanding.
I was trying to find the election results before we came here. That's why I couldn't find it.
That should be. Brian?
Dave, you are correct in recounting that, and that's why on this schedule in the beginning, I think it's important to have a session that like the next meeting that starts with revisiting that history. Because as I came to this commission, became interested in it, I don't know anybody who are county commissioners. I just called and said I was interested. And I heard things along the way about what had happened in the past, about this 97, and it got voted down twice and this kind of thing. And as I've looked at it, I realized, you know, I think there might be some misunderstandings about history. That doesn't mean that people would agree with what the recommendations are or that I agreed with what it was. But I think understanding that chronology is important. I also think it's really important for not only this commission, but the public to understand the statute that provides what optional forms of government are that we are allowed to select from if we do make a selection. Recommendation.
Yeah, I agree. Any still available members of that commission were on my list of people of interest, as well as perhaps the commissioners at the time, if they're still around, so that they could talk to us about why they chose not to put the results of the commission onto the ballot. That may be interesting. The other thing that I'd like to find out is, while we know that no other counties in Idaho have changed from the 3-member commission model, it would be interesting to know if any of them have done study commissions and what the output of those groups have been.
Further discussion?
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment on the information gathering phase as compared to the writing and finalizing. I think we need to leave it a little bit fluid. The most important part of this is the information gathering. We really need to do a good job of assessing all the information that's out there and incorporating it into our thoughts and sharing that with the public so that they have a feel for it. I would think that the writing and finalizing, we could shorten that timeline a little bit. Perhaps some of us who don't work could be given a template and asked to do a fair amount of the legwork on that so that we could maybe speed that up. I only mention that, or I mention that too, in the sense that if we feel as we get to near the end of the information gathering, if we have other leads and we want to add on to it, we need to then have a plan as to what we will shorten later on.
Excellent. It's my anticipation that each week we will set the agenda for the following week. This is a good guide, and I'm not knocking it at all, but I think that when we get down to it, we're going to be able to say, well, we're not prepared to bring that individual in, so we need to bring somebody else. We've got a report on, as you were going to do, other governments, other counties in other states. That's not available to us yet, or that is available and something else isn't. So I think it's best if we remain fluid on the actual information that's going to be each week. And we set our agendas basically once a week at the meeting before. Did you want
Yeah.
something, Dave?
Yeah, I just think, well, two things. One is I'd like to know what would be the next steps after this discussion is over with this plan. But the other comment I'd like to make is I want to agree with Kurt and someone else mentioned about the public input earlier on in the process. But I also think, based on some work we've done with things that are kind of controversial, giving the public a knowledge of when their input is going to be solicited early on in the process is important. Now, of course, any member of the public can send us anything, anytime they want, and that's fine. And whatever information is sent to the county, Nancy will forward to us and we'll be able to get the feedback. But if we could tell the public that we expect in 2 months after the gathering of information or something, that we will be going and having a mechanism, whether it's a survey or something, to get some idea what they're thinking, that will at least let them know when it's going to happen. And without telling them when it's going to happen, speculation will come about.
So if it,
Bruce?
Real quick, if I could just propose, because I think that this framework that Brian put together is excellent, and that we all recognize that the schedule will be fluid, that perhaps we set something in stone in the schedule that says we will revisit this schedule so we can make adjustments along the way. So that way the public can get a much better idea, because we don't want to say today, we want your comment in September, when a couple of things could happen between now and then. And that way, at least we can modify this schedule for the public so that they can at least have something to count on in a reasonable point in the future.
I think it would be helpful, at least if we could agree that we will or won't get public input prior to coming up with a recommendation. So if we tell you that we will, and it's fluid, that's one thing. But if we don't, I think they're going to want to have some input before we recommend something. It's my personal opinion.
And I understand. I guess what I was just saying is that we really don't know what's going to happen
I
on
agree.
August 18th. But if we do an assessment on August 1st or whatever,
I wanted to ask a logistical question that maybe Nancy can help us answer. When it comes to scheduling interviews with the various officials, how much lead time do we need realistically?
I spoke with the commissioners about this, and so far their feedback is very positive. They're eager to meet with this group, and it shouldn't take very much lead time. Each of them sets their own evening schedule, so it'll be on a case-by-case basis, but I think most of them, my experience working with them, a week, maybe two, to sort of let them know when you're thinking about having them in.
Fair enough. And the same for the other elected officials, I presume?
I believe so, and for the
Even though you haven't
commissioner,
talked to them, I know you're
yeah, and
asking speculative.
for those I don't know their schedules as well. For the commissioners, I know that they're anticipating that question already, so I don't think it will take very long. And I just wanted to say as well, one of the things that was handed out this evening is a list of principals at the county that you may find interesting. As Brian mentioned, Dina is one of those names on there, our finance director. I realized it was one person I did leave off of there, but I'm sure we'll be adding to it as we go along, and hopefully that's helpful to you.
Yes, thank you. Brian?
on the lines of the getting some assistance or skill set to talk about the financial implications of the various options. In here, I had noted one individual's name. It's Dina Yarrow. But that got me thinking about the 97 report, because there were source notes to that, source notes 1, and one of the things they had done, it looks like, back in that report was, item number 12 under source notes 2. I'm sorry, it's source notes 2 of that report. Item 12, they had a proposed Kootenai County government restructuring study by a G.R. Jackson and Associates back in February of '96. And I was curious what that was. It sounds like they had somebody do a study perhaps concurrent with the study commission or maybe beforehand. I just don't know the context. So it would be helpful to know that and actually maybe see what it was. But again, it's source note 2, item 12 listed in the notes to that 97 report. Now, I'm not suggesting that we recommend hiring somebody. That's not what I'm doing.
No.
I'm not doing that. I'm saying that struck me as interesting because I think somebody probably did a financial analysis back then, and maybe that's something we want to think about, and whether the individual who might be able to bring a skill set to bear on that could update it or something, but at no cost.
Nancy, do you think you can find that in the history?
That is not a document I'm familiar with or have come across before. I will take a look for that. We have identified at least 2 of the members of that 96 group that are still local and probably easily reached. We'll keep researching that as well. And I've pulled all of the election history and started marking off which of those elected officials as well may be available for you to interview. So I'll get all of that out to the group.
Excellent.
Can I make one comment?
Yes, Phil.
For what it's worth, I know that the clerk who signed the report in 1997 was Dan English. I know he's in the hospital right now, but I'm sure he'd be glad to come at some point.
Any further discussion?
I'm going to speculate that maybe we should plan 2 weeks to reach out to the former committee members and any commissioners that might be around from that time period just for scheduling purposes, and maybe we invert the order and do the Idaho Code options next week because we can do that without external parties joining us. And then plan the 96 commission for 2 weeks from now.
You were saying just flip the order of them. I think that's fine. I had the same thing in mind of it could be either or, and that gives us time to set up and schedule folks that we want to hear from. Yeah.
Yes.
Totally agree.
We've run a little long on this one, but I think we can make it up with some of the other subjects. Any further discussion? Okay. Nancy, this is your section now, the administrative meeting for the county commissioners.
So I've got some questions for the group on this. I did put together a document which Dave Botting, Dave Levine, did either of you get that email this morning with the breakdown? Did you see that, Dave?
Of the meetings? The meetings, yes, I have.
Okay, so that's what I'm going to hand out here, and all I've done for now to find out if that's a helpful document is this has got a breakdown from 2020 of the meetings. I think that should be for your table. The number of meetings in 2020 that the board had, and then it's broken down with a more detailed breakdown of what those meetings were all year. I realized after I started it that 2020 was kind of an odd year because in the month of April and about half of May, the board canceled most of their meetings due to COVID. Despite that, there should be for you. Despite that, they did have almost 350 meetings. What I'm looking for some information with this group. So again, this is the summary page off the front and just the January breakdown, and then I have that breakdown for the whole year. What I need from this group is some explanation. When we say administrative meetings, what you're thinking of in the terms of administration. We have some things such as public hearings that the board currently does where they're called out in statute to be at those. I don't know the legality as far as again, there are so many options, and the optional forms of government are so clearly defined. I don't know if any of their current duties would change, or what those duties are that would change with that. So what is administrative now, or what is required now may not be required if we change something. So just trying to sort of determine, things like the elected official meeting, that would be administrative, but possibly something that they would want to continue to do is all meet together as electeds. So it becomes kind of a complex question, just defining administration. I do believe a lot of the HR function, and you'll see there, they included in the summary, the number of HR meetings each month. Probably a lot of that could fall to an administrator, a manager, executive. But it's just kind of a question as far as what this group is thinking or looking for as far as a breakdown.
I believe in the statute, and if somebody has a better feel for it, you can correct me. But I believe in the statute that if we go either with the executive commission or the administrator commission, that all of the departments, including the row officials, will report directly to that executive or that administrator. All of the personnel issues will be handled by the administrator. Basically, the commissioners will fall back to legislative and appeals, quasi-judicial issues.
That wasn't clear to me, that the row officials would report to whatever the other party is, executive or manager.
To the extent that they report to anybody,
Okay, fair enough.
they would. The administrator or the executive would be the chief budget officer. They would be reporting to that executive, to that administrator for budget purposes. The commissioners would no longer, county commissioners, would no longer be responsible for creating and approving the budget necessarily. They would have final approval, but they would not be down into the weeds on that.
I guess that's something to explore as we meet with them.
I don't disagree. What I was trying to get from Nancy here is she tells us that they're having about 400 meetings a year. Okay, if I had that many meetings and had to prepare for that many agenda items, it would be more than a full-time job. Okay, so what I'm looking at here is the first question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to relieve or do we want to recommend? We're not doing it. Do we want to recommend relieving the county commissioners of the administrative load so that they have more time to work on the judicial and the appeals quasi-judicial issues? I said judicial, I meant legislative and quasi-judicial. That's one of the questions that, as we go through gathering information and as we get into our discussions, the information of how much of their time is spent on administration becomes a very important issue in my mind. Because if they're spending 2 hours a year, we're not doing anything to offload this to a $100,000 administrator or to an executive, elected executive. If they're spending 2,000 hours a year, it makes a lot more sense to talk about starting to offload some of this.
Yeah, that's fair. And just for context, of course, if we take those 400 meetings and we divide them by 50 weeks, that's less than 10 meetings a week. I don't know what your other calendars look like, but I've got a lot more than 10 meetings a week on mine.
Actually, if I could add to that. So the meetings, when we discuss these 350 meetings a year, these are strictly the public meetings that the full board attends. So on top of that, they're having individual meetings with their department heads, they're meeting with other elected officials, they're meeting with legislators, and they all have an entire list of community groups that they liaise with. So they're attending chamber meetings, they're attending economic development meetings. So all of that is on top of the 350 meetings a year.
So I think one of the things we're going to have to be deciding as we're going through the information gathering, as we're going through the discussions, how much of this do we believe can be offloaded to an administrator, and how much of it is going to remain the responsibility of the commissioners? And that's something we need to discuss when we're talking about the executive commission style or the administrator commission style. Because that, to me, is the key to those two questions. How much of the workload is there that would be offloaded? Nancy, did you have a comment there?
My only comment on that would be that that sounds like a great question for the county commissioners when you have them in.
If there's no further discussion on that,
Dave,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
the only concern I have, maybe a little bit with making that such a specific question, is that an assumption has been made that the whole reason we're doing this is because they're overwhelmed, versus looking at alternative forms of government as a whole for benefit of the community, not just for benefit of the county commissioners. So yes, we want to take that into consideration, but I don't think that can be the foundation of why we're doing what we're doing. It's too specific to me, and it puts too much emphasis on the county commissioners, and then it's almost leading it to the assumption or the direct result of there will be a county executive or a county administrator, which I think if we're trying to be transparent, those are options. Those aren't the only two options.
I don't think it's leading into a question of we're going to do this, either the executive or the administrator. That's not where I'm looking at it. We have basically 5 options. I know that there's a 6th, which means we can combine with some other county, and I don't think that's something that we're really going to discuss necessarily beyond the minimum. We're too big to combine with Bonner County or Boundary County or any of the others in the area, I think. But that's a discussion we will have in the future. What I'm looking at on that is that's one of the decisions we have to make. Is there a reason to go and offload some of the administrative work? That comes up whether we're talking about an executive, whether we're talking about an administrator, whether we're talking about 5 commissioners with a 3-commissioner subcommittee to handle administrative functions, 7 commissioners with a 3-commissioner subcommittee to handle administrative functions. All of it, every single option we're facing, deals with the question of how much administrative effort are they making? How much of their time is locked into that? And should it be offloaded to an executive, an administrator, or a 3-person subcommittee?
Well, but those are only the first 2 of your 14 questions, Dave.
They are. And the reason for that is if you look at the statute, it goes over all of the 6 row positions and says we have to decide whether that row position is better elective or appointive. It goes over all 6 of those and says, should we redefine their job function? 2 of them, should we split the function up into multiple jobs? 4 of them, should we combine those and eliminate a job? So that gives us 12 questions right there that are not really the commissioners, county commissioners.
Right, but I'm seconding Tammy's point that, or Tamara's, sorry, that our ultimate outcome is to make a recommendation that will be of maximum benefit to the county across the board across all 14 questions. Base. And so I don't think Dave was presuming with his question to focus on any presumed answer. I think he was just focusing in terms of the commissioners themselves and how those roles might change and what to look at.
Well, I agree. I just was trying to make it as clear and obviously, again, with the, sorry. No, I agree, totally. And I wasn't trying to say that you were saying something very specific and not allowing for everything. I just want to make sure that we're very transparent and that we're looking at all of the options. And like Nancy said, talking to the commissioners themselves and seeing, are they overwhelmed? Are they overloaded? Would they like to be able to, delegate certain activities or responsibilities? I think that's great. You kept mentioning the 2 repeatedly, and that's why I just wanted to make sure that we're all clear and open, and it's looking at all possible options, including not changing anything as well.
I agree. We could choose to stay with the 3 commissioners exactly the way we are. We could choose to make a modification, and there are, 4 other options that make sense. As I say, I don't think consolidation with a neighboring county makes sense, And I'm not sure we want to get into the idea of setting up a charter county. That is something we can discuss. I'm not ruling any of this out. I just don't think that either consolidation or a charter county are going to be anyone's favorite until we get into this and find out the information tells us something different. Okay. Yes,
Quick question, and I might have missed it, so I apologize if you said it and I didn't.
that's okay.
Administrative functions is defined as what? Just to help me out. What would that classically mean? How would you define administrative functions?
Administrative functions would be the day-to-day decisions and processes that keep the county running. Personnel decisions, reports from the second tier, assuming that we would go with, say, an appointed position, and I'm not saying we're going to, but assuming we move one of the elected positions to an appointed position, that person or that department would then be reporting directly to the administrator. They would appoint the person with the approval of the county commissioners. That person would be then reporting to them. As long as they're elective, the amount of reporting back will be minimal. If they become appointed positions, the amount of reporting back would be significant. At least that's my experience.
It doesn't encompass administrative hearings and things of this nature. That's still the idea that might be carved off still into the commissioners.
I believe what you're asking about is administrative hearings, I believe are administrative appeals. And administrative appeals are the quasi-judicial function and would still reside with the commissioners, it's my understanding.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Dave, as a lifelong administrator and manager, I think that when administration works well, you don't know it's there. And so there have been many times in my career when I've asked for changes, asked for more staff, and gotten the pushback, well, why? It's working just fine. It's because you want it to work fine. When you've got problems is when you know that you have to maybe look at a different way of doing your business. I think that a number of us in not the commissioner level, not even the department head level, we're dealing with the line staff, and I think that's where it's been breaking down in this county. And I think that's what I hear from fellow citizens. So I think the whole administrative role is very important, but it can be handled either by a commissioner, by any of these forms, but it's a very, very important role. And as this county grows, it's going to start to break down even more if we don't look at that.
Thank you, Kristen. And unless there's some other discussion right here on the issues, Kristen has just introduced us to the next item, the current county structure. This is an open discussion of what we have heard, what we know to be issues with the current structure. We can either open this up or we can table this again and give ourselves more time to discuss the bylaws. I think that may be the more important issue. There was a preliminary set of bylaws that has been distributed. Brian has another preliminary set of bylaws that he has structured, and I believe he would like to put that up on the board so we can discuss the two competing templates for bylaws.
I'm not sure that they're competing, but I can't put them up because I couldn't get them onto the drive on this computer. A little bit of a technical issue. Maybe Nancy's coming over to help me out. I emailed it to you, I think.
Hard copies would be better.
I didn't hear any objection to hard copies. Okay. While Nancy is making the hard copies for us so that we can take a look at Brian's ad, is there any discussion on the bylaws as presented in, what was it, yesterday's email?
I'm sorry, which, are we talking about the bylaws that came from Nancy or the bylaws that Brian had prepared?
Right now, the bylaws that came from Nancy, since Nancy's making copies of the ones from Brian.
I had two observations on the ones that were circulated by email from Nancy. One is that they didn't really say much, and your explanation before the meeting off the record kind of explained why, because you extracted them kind of from the statute requirements. But the other thing that concerned me was that the idea of removing a member with 2/3 vote struck me as maybe we should kick that up to 3/4, just from making it to be more of a supermajority.
I'm not going to argue with you, but since that's in statute, I'm not sure that's within our purview to change.
Okay, I didn't recall that particular component being specified in statute.
Yeah, I think the only thing I took in here that was not in the statute was the replacement of a commission member by the alternate, and how to then replace if that alternate or another commission member resigns, is lost, and so on. I have been told that I wasn't actually clear on the method of replacing a second commissioner, and the idea was that whichever commissioner had named that commission member, whichever county commissioner had named that commission member here, they would then name the replacement as well within 30 days. That was what I gathered from it. Okay. Any further discussion?
Could I suggest that we hold any further comments until we've seen Brian's and had a chance to?
I was just trying to fill the time between now and the time Nancy gets back. If there are problems, if there are comments to be made to this one set, we can discuss those. The minute Brian's get back here, we can look at that and discuss his too.
I was thinking maybe we could talk about plans for maybe the next 4-ish meetings and whether or not, who we would want to try to prioritize. I know we've got kind of a skeletal outline here, suggestion from Brian, but maybe we can skip to the planning the agenda step of our agenda now and think about the next 4 meetings-ish so that we can get invitations out to the appropriate people in a timely fashion.
Okay. Would you like to make a motion?
Do I need to move that we take the agenda out of order?
Normally, yes.
Okay, so I move that we talk about upcoming meetings at this point until we have bylaws back in our hands.
Can I get a second? We have a motion. We have a second by Bryant Bushling. Vote by hands. Anyone opposed? It looks to me like it's unanimous.
Now just a motion to move things around. And
Yes, we're going to move the 8B up above 8A. Make 8B 8A, make 8A 8B. I'm sorry, you didn't want the list of potential candidates, you wanted the preliminary schedule.
it's 8C.
Yeah, I was
My
thinking
mistake, 8C, not 8B. That's,
yeah, I was thinking the tactical schedule here for the next 3-4 meetings roughly.
my apology, I misstated. We're going to move C up to 8A. Let's talk about the preliminary schedule. Any discussion? Oh, come on, somebody. Okay. I believe that what we have here, that Brian has done, is a masterful presentation. What we can do is, because we need at least a week or more to invite anyone in, we can start with the discussion of study commission, schedule, and bylaws as the primary function in the agenda next week. Would that make sense to anyone here? Discussion? Rejection?
Would you repeat that again? You
Yes,
said the
please.
bylaws, and what was the second?
What's showing for 526, discussion of study commission schedule and bylaws. I'm sorry,
That's today.
no, I'm sorry. 6-9, Idaho Code options.
Thank you.
That we already have in our documentation. It's easy enough for us to move that up front. We don't have to rely on anybody else for that. So
If
if
we're ready-
that's agreeable,
Yeah, I'll move that we take item listed as 6-9 to 6-2.
okay. Second,
Second.
Second.
vote.
Thanks.
Against? We got 6-4, and did you just vote against? Oh, we got 6-4 and no against, so we had 3 abstentions, it looks like. So that passes. We can then bring the 6-2 theoretically down to 6-9 with the proviso that we will have to invite some people, and if they can't make it on 6-9, we may have to start shifting some of these things around. So I would suggest that we probably hold the 6-2 or the 6-16 invitation of the county commissioners both in our back pocket for that 6-9 meeting. We can make that decision. We can look to see whether we can get the 96 study people in here on 6-9. If we cannot, then next week we can invite the county commissioners because they've been forewarned and they will be prepared with minimal time. Is that agreeable? Further discussion?
That seemed like a fair approach, is plan for the commission. If we can't get them to come in, fall back to the commissioners. I do think we should also reserve potentially a second carryover meeting for the commissioners. Just, I'm concerned about the amount of time that it's going to take to have a decent interview for them.
I agree. We may have to look at that as we're going down the pike. If we bring the commissioners in and we do not get all 3 commissioners in a reasonable length of time, we can always extend from 90 minutes to 120 or 150, but if we can't get them in a reasonable length of time, then we can always set the agenda for the following week to bring them back. That's the advantage of setting the agenda each week. Further discussion?
Next week, we're going to be doing the 6-9 stuff.
Yes, that's where we were. We voted on that. We want to move 6-9 to 6-2.
Would we want to have public comment after we have that discussion?
I think it's a little early. We really don't have anything to present to them.
Well, I'd like to suggest that after we have the commissioners talk to us, because the public will have the opportunity to view those meetings or attend them in person but not make comment, that we should schedule a public comment session after we've had the commissioners in.
I like that. I agree.
Separate meeting, or
Yes, a separate meeting.
I'm sorry, can you explain the purpose of that meeting?
To collect public comment, because they will have had the opportunity to view the testimony, if you like, or the interviews of the commissioners.
And
As-
and you think that's enough that they can come in, ask questions, express their concerns, that we will be informed enough to answer them intelligently? Or
It's
should we
not,
wait a little
we're not
further?
answering them. It's simply a public comment.
Public comment doesn't allow them to ask questions of the commission. Public comment only allows them to make comments to the commission.
It's collecting information from the public.
I understand, but there's nothing worse than going to a meeting and speaking up and then you leave with nothing done. That's first very frustrating. I think we need to be prepared to give something back to people, that we're doing something other than just sitting here listening to them.
Well, we are in an information collection phase, and listening to them is collecting information.
I think they're collecting information too. And the information is, what are we doing? And I think we need to be able to answer some of that if they're going to be here.
My own opinion, and that's just my opinion as a commissioner, not from the chair, is that we might need to go a little further with the information gathering before we bring in public comment, because all we're going to have had will be the county commissioners. And that isn't really a great deal for us to be forming any opinions on. Once we've had some more of the discussions, it's possible for us to inform the public and listen to their comments. But I think right now, might be premature. As I believe David Levine commented, they're free to send us emails anytime they want, and I'm kind of surprised none have appeared yet. But they can make comments at any time, and Nancy will provide that to the our commissioners here. Ryan?
So as part of this discussion, I tend to agree with what you're saying, Dave, about getting some things under our belt and then having the public in. I think it's really important to have the public in, but I think in this structure, we just flipped the June 2nd and the June 9th around, which I'm totally fine with. But I do think it'd be good to get both of those under our belts and hear from the commissioners, and then have an opportunity for public comment, because it gives the public a framework for understanding what's possible under the statute in terms of optional forms of government, and it reviews what happened in the past when a study commission was convened and gives that backdrop, and then we hear from the current commissioners. And then I think with that information that is in our minds at that point and the public's, we can have a good, meaningful public comment.
Yeah, I was presuming that we had the study commission before the commissioners when I was saying that do public comment after the commissioners. So I agree entirely with you.
If I could, Dave.
Yes, Dave.
I may be sounding like a broken record, but I really think that we need to think about communicating to the public what we're doing, not detail-wise. I understand that. But there's been a lot of speculation about what this group does. If we're going to have public comment, it would be nice if we had some form of, we're meeting, we started to meet, we basically are going to get public input throughout the process, that we're in a gathering mode. It's going to take us up to a year, maybe less. But to give some context about how the process works, so that if we do have public comments and are saying, well, no one's talking to me, the answer is, that's right, we're not yet, but it will be in the plan, and we want to be transparent. All the documents we are reviewing are online, and just to go out there and say, we just started, and here's what we're doing on a high level, and as we get more detail, we will share it. As soon as we get it, we'll share it with you, and keep it going throughout the whole process.
If I understand what you're saying, Dave, rather than public comment, you're looking at public information, trying to tell them what it is we're hearing, what it is we're doing.
Right.
We're not deciding anything yet.
No, I
what
just
we're
think-
hearing and what we're doing.
I think that what happens is people don't understand the process and where they are involved in it. They may not even understand a public hearing is required. And if we went out there, it would be really Nancy. It would be a press release or something like that. That would go out there and say, here's what it is. Here's what we're doing. You will be involved. It's a longer process. Nothing will ever be decided without a public hearing. And whatever those steps are, not details. We don't have details, but just as a beginning, and tell them where to go to. If you want more information, here it is. If you want to attend a meeting, here it is. And you start the process of giving information out to the public. So over time, there's many opportunities for them to be communicated with.
Right, but if we're suggesting that we would be doing a public comment meeting in approximately 30 days, give or take, maybe another week, why wouldn't we include all that information in said press release where we would be announcing the meeting?
You can. There's different ways of doing it. My view is slightly different than yours, is that communications is about going over it twice or 3 or 4 or 5 times. You could do it today, you could do it next week, and you could do it when you announce the meeting. It's because people get different things different ways, and We could do it whatever. It's not my decision, obviously. I just know that getting information out multiple times is beneficial.
Kristen?
I agree very much with David. I think that it really wouldn't serve the public to have them come and present their views when they don't have very much information. I mean, this is a struggle for all of us. We're all learning a lot, and yet we're devoting our time to it. I think that we need to keep the public informed, and we need to keep them aware of our information gathering process, and at some point have input. But I don't see any benefit of having talking about the different forms that we can choose from and having the 3 commissioners speak and then getting public input. I'm not sure that really gives the right message to the public in terms of what they are going to comment on.
I'm not sure we have given them anything to comment on at that point.
I guess that's exactly what I'm saying. You said it very succinctly.
Ryan?
This may not help, but I'll give it a whirl. One way to elicit public input, comment, if you will, I work in very large webinar environments with lots of lawyers and scientists all the time, and we don't all get along at all. So what we do, though, is check marks along the way is we actually take polls, and we're able to set up a poll so the folks that are online can actually participate and kind of we can elicit, like, are we headed in the right direction? And if you think about the questions, you can lay them out there, and you can and people can be free to make other comments. But there are some line issues that we'll be thinking about that are really important. Like, you had this list here that you came in with of the 14 questions. Well, I'm sure we're going to fill out that list with more questions, sub-questions.
Sure.
And those, maybe that's something that we can do some online polling. That sounds a little fancy, but it actually works pretty well. And folks who are participating online have that opportunity to click on the poll, and we get real-time results coming up. That's one way. And public comment, one of the things that concerns me is that, and I mentioned a moment ago, if you don't have under your belt the knowledge of what's allowed under the statute, what has the history been, and then the commissioner's perspective, then it's kind of, you don't have the backdrop to make a meaningful comment necessarily. You might just get comments that say, this commission should have never been organized. And you're fine to do that, that's fine. But at the same time, I think comments that help us in terms of, other than we don't like this study commission, would be better, more meaningful, honestly. So, I think people need that backdrop and understanding before they can meaningfully comment. And one way to elicit that might be through some utilizing online polling as part of the meeting. So,
Is that a mechanism that's available to us, Nancy?
It is still working. This group has the ability to request budgetary items from the commissioners. So if we could find a free poll online, we could certainly do that. If there were a particular platform you liked better that cost money, we would just go to the commissioners and make that request. I would also throw out there you have a few different tools at your disposal here. You would have potentially the option of creating something like a Facebook page where we could turn it where there were no comments on posts, but you would be able to share information that way and also do polls that way. I would mention that we've had a member of the community already come up who does podcasts and interviews and online things. We have another person here, a young person who has offered to do podcasts and help with social media. So we have a couple members of the public that have offered to help with that kind of outreach. We could certainly reach out to them if the commission wanted to and see what they could offer if you're looking for outward-facing information prior to taking comment from the public.
I noticed that last week we had a reporter here I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but is this reporter still here? No? She's not, okay. One of the things we can do is to have the press put out a piece, as you say, a press release, that requests people to comment via email. If it's important that we poll, that's one thing. I think alternative it would be to request email comments and then for us to be able just to go through those and see what's being said. The only issue I have with what you're saying, Brian, with the poll, is that your group is a fixed group that you're polling. We're talking about everybody in the county, and a poll, any online poll, is pretty much worthless as a poll when you don't have a fixed group you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that it could disenfranchise certain parts of the county, and we would not want to do that, or at least we would not want to rely on that as our exclusive
The polling, you mean?
approach. Yeah, the polling. I think that having the opportunity for the public to come in and do in-person comment, even if it's simply to say, I think this is a huge, colossal waste of time, while it is not constructive and doesn't help us with the task we've been assigned, it can help give them an opportunity to feel heard, because we will hear them, and it can give the opportunity to, well-informed or not, be a part of the process, and I think that's important.
Okay, go ahead, Tamara.
I agree with,
Real quickly, I'd like to pull this one to a close and make a decision on next week's agenda, because we have the bylaws. It is almost 7 o'clock. We are definitely going to run late tonight trying to discuss the bylaws. We're going to be at least 7:30, 8 o'clock before we get through this if we don't walk away from it. So let's try to pull this to a close quickly. Tamara, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I agree with Kurt. There's a lot of very intelligent people out there who are very well informed. I mean, to say that the 12 of us are the only ones that know what's going on, have done the research, been a part of it, or have anything beneficial to say is a very small part of the community. There's a lot of people out there. Yes, there'll be some that absolutely would not be maybe helpful towards us, to what Kurt was saying, but there's a large contingent out there that I think would be very helpful, and to hear them early on would also be very beneficial for us too.
Further comments? Your mic's still not working.
To people not make.
No? Brian was saying he did not mean to cut anyone off when he suggested polling. It was simply an option.
Well, for next week, I thought we were going to be doing the 6-9 item.
Next week.
Yeah, and maybe we'll, right, so the question is, are we going to finish the bylaws tonight, or do we need to roll over the final approval of the bylaws to next week?
I'd like to see us at least go over the bylaws
Right.
and discuss them tonight. If there are modifications to be made, we can make those suggestions.
Right,
And then we can do a final approval next week very quickly, instead of spending an entire hour-and-a-half meeting on the bylaws again next week.
so we'll have the 6-9 items, bylaws, will be 2 agenda items for next week, so far.
Approval of any amended bylaws that we've come up with.
Right,
this week.
approval
Yes.
of the bylaws, okay. We may want to consider having a communication strategy discussion. That's what we talked about today. And I think, you know, Nancy is the communication person for the county. She may be able to give us some ideas of how things like these are communicated and when to engage the public, not telling us what to do, but just giving expert advice on communication strategy, which maybe there are people in the room who have that expertise, I don't. So maybe communication strategy, because I think it's important that we agree on how to gather public input that we all believe is important.
I like the idea. Any discussion on that subject? Okay. We have 3 agenda items for next week. The approval of the bylaws should go quickly. That's not a major item. The Idaho Code. We have a couple lawyers here who know that this can get deep and it can be difficult to interpret some of this stuff. I think that's going to be a rather long discussion, trying to figure out exactly what the Idaho Code means, in spite of the fact that it's fairly simple. Then another long discussion, how are we going to communicate with the public? Does that state what you said, Dave?
Yeah, communication strategy, right.
Oh, I believe we have 2 very involved discussion topics and 1 short one. That might fill out an agenda. Open for discussion beyond that.
I suspect that will indeed fill out the agenda. I wanted to raise the question because this was cited as, or suggested as a presentation on the alternate forms of government. From whom would such a presentation be obtained? Fair enough. We'll repeat for on behalf of Brian. Okay. Okay. So Brian is volunteering to put together a PowerPoint presentation based upon statute and the summary extract that was provided in our briefing materials. And he hopes it won't take too much of the meeting.
I would hope so too, but I have very little faith that it's not going to take a while. Okay. Any further discussion of the agenda for 6-9? I'm sorry, for 6-2, not 6-9, for 6-2. Although Kurt was not talking into the microphone, he wants to discuss invitations for following meetings, which I agree wholeheartedly, because some of these we're going to have to give at least a couple weeks' notice, maybe more, depending on who it is we're looking for and how eager they are to speak to us. So, for the 6-2 agenda, we are talking about bylaw approval, discussion of Idaho Code, and communication strategies. Do we have any further discussion, or can we close discussion on that?
And invites.
Additional invites, you mean?
Well, didn't you say?
No, I want to talk about that now.
Oh, got it, I'm sorry.
Okay, call for a vote. Is that a reasonable agenda for next week? In favor? Okay, that's unanimous.
Anybody make a motion? We don't need a motion.
I don't believe we need a motion to set the agenda.
Agreed.
Would anybody want to make a motion and second that?
No,
Okay,
it's just more writing.
okay. Now, I know we just got these and we haven't had a chance, so let's take a couple of minutes. You have a copy too, right?
Yeah, I have
Okay.
a copy. I
Well,
wanted
not
to-
a shared
well,
copy.
Did we want to talk about invites for the succeeding meetings now while we're kind of talking agenda before we go back to the bylaws?
I'd like to go back to the bylaws myself and then talk about the invitees, because that's not the next week's agenda.
Fair enough.
And then we can talk about who we're going to invite and who our backups are and how we're going to deal with it. I'd like to take probably about 3 to 5 minutes now for everyone to get a chance to read these bylaws that Brian put together, and then we can discuss them. Do we still have some people reading? I would take it then that everyone has read Brian's
We have,
option.
some of us may need a break.
Now we have a 5-minute non-reading break. It's been proposed that we take a break and reconvene at 7:10. If anyone wants to step outside, smoke 'em if you got 'em.
So 7:05 to 7.
Most of us here are old enough to know that. Since they've all been unanimous, we're okay so far, David.
I'm running as fast as I can.
Anytime you need us to slow, say so.
No,
You need to catch up on something,
Yeah.
go do it.
I think with, like I did last time, is
prepared to discuss Brian's run at the bylaws. Personally, I like his better. Let's just start with that. I just like his work better on this.
I'll just point out a distinction or two between the two. And I like yours, Dave, and I'm not just being gratuitously complimentary. I like yours because it's straightforward and it's, maybe just the thing. Mine's more detailed, and that's kind of the person I am. I go into a lot of detail. But the difference between our things, really there's a lot of complementary stuff between our two versions, but mine differs in that the removal of a commissioner.
Yes, if they miss 3 meetings.
Right, there's that. You miss 3, and then it goes up to the, board, Kootenai county commissioners for removal. Now, that's just because in my mind, I was thinking they're the ones that appointed us. They should be the ones to remove us, but maybe that's not right. I was moving quickly, and I might have not made the right call there. So that's a distinction I just point out. I think on this Article 4, Section 1, Sub H, where it says appoint commissioners to subcommittees, that might not be consistent with the statute. As I was going back over this, I got to double check.
Sorry, Article 4,
on page 2, Article 6, duties of officers. Section 1, subpart H, where it's appoint commissioners to subcommittees. This is one of the powers of the chair.
Yes.
And I have a feeling that study commissioners cannot serve on a subcommittee, and I might have made an error when I wrote that in. I have to double check the code and make sure. I wrote this in there, and then on subsequent thought, I'm thinking that might not be right.
I believe, if I remember the code correctly, we can have subcommittees, and we can even appoint people who are not members of the commission to those subcommittees.
Yeah, this was appoint commissioners to the subcommittees, and this is a nuance, which is I didn't think on second thought here that we could appoint one of ourselves, get appointed to a subcommittee. You can? Okay. So my recollection of the ordinance was off. So this is written correctly then.
I believe so.
The only concern, sorry.
There was one other.
The only concern I would have here is in terms of the term appoint, because my only concern on that one item is the term appoint. I think a more voluntary as opposed to dictatorial approach might be appropriate.
So a nicer word is what you're saying, yeah. There was one other, Dave, there was another thing, and this I wanted to point out that, and I picked this up from the first meeting, but it might not be true, which is you were at the first meeting talking about not voting unless there was a tie, kind of the Robert's Rules approach. I didn't know if you and all of us agreed, like, well, no, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be voting regardless. And the way I wrote it up was more in the way that you had first articulated it at our meeting, where it was like you weren't going to vote until you tie. And I want to make sure I pointed out I wrote it up that way. I'm not wedded to that at all. I'm just saying I was going from memory.
That's fine. And what I was talking about at that time, what I was talking about at that meeting, Roberts, the chair, does not vote unless he's breaking a tie, unless the vote makes a difference. For example, if there is a motion and it is tied whether to pass the motion or not, the chair could vote to pass the motion, but cannot vote to reject the motion because the motion is rejected if it does not get a majority vote. Therefore, under Robert's rules, the chair would only be able to vote in favor of that motion, would not be able to reject that motion because his vote would not make a difference. Now, under Roberts, there is a forgiveness for small groups. Roberts is made for hundreds of people, and you have to keep track of 435 people, of 100 senators, and so on. In this little group, 12 of us to speak, 9 of us to vote. Kurt said that he had no objection to the chair voting every time anyway, and that's kind of the direction we went. But I'm not averse to the chair not being allowed to vote unless it makes a difference, but I would say that that's the exception, not to vote to break a tie, but vote to make a difference.
Well, I say keep it simple, and I'll strike out D. I was just going from memory of what I thought I heard, and I think that you should vote
Okay.
all the time, so. not just
I agree. I think you should vote. I think all of our votes should be recorded. Well, yes and no, but I mean, it should be on the record that people vote or they choose not to vote if they abstain.
And I think that you've got a point there. Not everyone is familiar with Roberts, and not everyone knows that the chair under Roberts is not supposed to vote unless it's to break it, to make a difference on a vote. And therefore, it would look like the chair was abstaining, and that might cause some issues. I agree, Brian. Let's take that section 3 out.
Okay, done. That's done.
Okay.
And then
I do have another question. When it comes to the, if a commissioner does not attend 3 consecutive regularly scheduled meetings, it's my understanding that as long as we can call in or Zoom in, it will be considered that we are in attendance, correct?
If you're attending by phone, if you're attending by Zoom, that is attending.
Yes, thank you. Just
I
wanted that
would-
clarification.
I would not question that. I don't think anybody here would. If you're attending telephonically, that's legal, that's permitted. I don't see an issue.
Thank you.
I don't believe this is part of the statute, though, is it, Brian? I'm trying to remember. I don't remember that in the statute.
I don't think it is particular to the study commission statute. I can go back and check. And I went through about 6 different bylaws for various advisory boards and that kind of thing. And I did this in the kind of the wee hours this morning. So if I included something that was not within the study commission statute, that's my bad, so I can double check that.
I don't think it's forbidden in the statute. I just don't think it came from the statute. So it's something we can discuss if we want to keep it, if we want to take it out. I think that is something that is up to the commission here. Do we have any discussion on Article 4, Section 3, the issue if a commissioner does not attend 3 consecutive meetings, regularly scheduled meetings, without providing prior notice, then the commission shall request the board to remove that commissioner from the commission. Do we have any discussion on that?
Well, what happens if if it takes a while for the commissioners to respond to that?
As long as they haven't been removed, they haven't been removed.
And I'd also maybe suggest changing shall request to may request to leave it more to the prerogative of the commission. I mean, it gives grounds if somebody just is not showing up and not communicating.
I agree with that. I've made that change.
Phil?
When they're referring to the commission may remove or shall remove, are we talking the county commission or this group here?
I believe we're talking about this
That's
commission.
what I thought, so, and I understand from reading this, these are bylaws used by lots of different, I see it says Historical Society at the bottom and so on. I just got a question. It goes on to say that we, with the, I think it says 2/3 vote, can remove anyone with or without cause.
Brian, you're going to have to clarify this. I believe that the 2/3 vote is of the county commissioners, not of this commission.
No,
No, I don't think this is
We're talking about Dave's version. You're talking the 2/3 in
the
Dave's?
removal.
Is it?
I apologize, then it is in the
Double spaced.
statute.
they're both versions, and, you know, one says 2/3 and the other says something a little different. I have them both here.
Sure.
I guess my concern is the following. Should this group be able to remove someone, one thing if they are attending meetings, that's like an automatic. But should we be able to vote to say, well, I don't want Dave here because I don't like him, basically. And I don't think that's right for a group like this. We're appointed by 3 separate commissions. It's not like one person goes with a commission and they're all voted on. I just feel like if you're going to remove someone, other than for failing to attend meetings, it should be a decision by the county commission, not by us among ourselves.
I
One
was
of-
corrected by Kurt. That was something that was in the statute.
Yeah,
That,
as 2.6 in your bylaws.
yes.
I think that there's a subtle change to this that may solve your question, is I don't think we could actually technically remove anybody. Just like what Brian said about we have to request the board to do it because they're the ones who appointed people. So if we want to keep this, the way it would maybe be changed is that we would request the board do it, and they would have oversight on whether to do it or not. And then the sentence would have to be rewritten because the officers can be removed by us without the board approval. So I think there's a difference there that if we want to keep the 2/3, if we want to keep it, it would be a recommendation to the county commissioners to remove it. We don't have the authority, I don't think.
Dave is looking in his copy of the statutes here. I think you're right in terms of the officers. I also questioned about removing commission members from the commission, but let's see what he finds in the statute here. Looks like Brian's doing the same research.
Yeah, I think the intent of this is not because we don't like each other. I think the intent is more if somebody is being disruptive or, not behaving professionally. But then again, the county commissioners can always do what they like, I think, anyway. While we're waiting for Dave, my question on the last one, Brian, on, I think it's on the last page. Public conduct of a public hearing. Under Article 12, the last page on the bottom. Item C, I don't think we could actually may allow. I think we allow. I mean, we don't have an option of not having a public hearing and saying you can't talk. So I think the word may is on item C should be the commission will allow public comment as properly noticed according to the open meeting law.
I think maybe the distinction is public hearing versus public comment. So, for instance, public comment within a meeting would be subject to the open meeting law, and it's up to us as to whether or not the agenda includes a public comment.
Yeah, I guess I was confused then. That's a good point. I was confused because it's a conduct of a public hearing. If public hearing is a generic term, then I understand it. I took it to be the proper term of a public hearing. So either we need to say conduct of public meetings or something like that, then you're exactly right, Kirk.
I can do that to make that clear, the distinction being make sure that item C reads such that it's clear that the commission may allow public comments as properly noticed for a meeting as opposed to a hearing, right? Because at a hearing, of course, you've got public.
Hearing has its own set of law rules, and public comment has really the chair discretion of what we do and with our input.
So I can tweak that to make that.
Yeah.
You could probably just move it to Article 7 under meetings instead of having it under the public hearing section.
You're right. That would make that better.
Yeah.
That's right. Good recommendation. So I can make that change and move that to under 7.
By the way, 5150, 5104-10, a study commission may establish advisory boards and committees, including on them persons who are not members of the study commission. So it would imply that we can put members of the commission on those subcommittees.
Okay, good.
I had another question, comment, seeking clarity from you, Brian. Under Article 10, the amendments, the idea that we would have to have the board agree to any amendments that we wanted to make to the bylaws that we ourselves chose seems like unnecessarily hamstringing ourselves. So perhaps we would want to say instead of going to the board, maybe we want to go with a 75% supermajority or something amongst the commission.
Unless someone can beat me to it, I'm not finding that in the statute, that being the removal of a member of the commission. I believe that may have come from bylaws from other organizations. And if that's the case, then that is something that we can discuss, change, eliminate, whatever it is, unless somebody else finds it in the statute and says we can't. So, discussion on, let's see, where were we? Article 4, Section 3, is it?
Yeah, it's the top of page
Yeah.
3. But they're not numbered.
No, top of page 3 is the secretary clerk.
Is it the top of page
responsibilities.
2?
I think we're talking Article 4, Section 3.
Yeah.
Okay. Conversation, discussion on Article 4, Section 3. If a commissioner does not attend 3 consecutive regularly scheduled commission meetings without providing prior notice to the chair or secretary, the commission shall request or may request, I believe that was turned into, the board to remove that commissioner from the commission. Commission may also remove any volunteer commission members or officers with or without cause if it determines said removal is in the best interest of the commission upon 2/3 vote of the commission. Reading that, if someone does not attend 3 meetings and doesn't comment about it, they just disappear into the woodwork, then we request the county commissioners to remove that person from the commission. The second part is this commission then would have the power to remove any member of the commission or officer of this commission with a 2/3 vote if they feel that it's in the best interest of the commission. That's 2 different issues, open for discussion.
So first, I suggest that we split those 2 into distinct paragraphs. And then regarding the second of those, regarding removing officers or commission members, I think removing officers with 2/3 vote, I think that's fine. If we chose to replace the secretary, for example, with somebody else, I think 2/3 vote of the commission is fine, and I'm sure Dave would appreciate it. But as far as removing members from the commission, I think that's going beyond what we really have the rights to do. At a very minimum, I would say it would need to be 75% of the committee, not just a quorum, but of the entire committee. But I suggest that maybe it's better just to strike that entirely.
I agree. The commissioners appointed us. I think that if there's an issue, it should be taken up with them, and it's their decision. And fortunately, we have alternates, so that each commissioner would feel that they would still have someone to keep things going.
Do I understand, get this closer, do I understand that what we're talking about is changing the 2/3 vote of this commission to a 2/3 vote of the Board of County Commissioners?
No, I'm not talking about that at all. I'm just saying, I'm not talking about the 2/3 versus 3/4. I'm just saying that this sentence here where see,
It's the second sentence of Section 3.
yes. It said the commission may also remove any volunteer commission members or officer with or without cause. I think I'm agreeing with Kurt that it's within our purview to remove an officer via vote, but it is not within our purview to remove a member of the commission, since the members were appointed by the commissioners.
Point
I
of
don't think that was
clarification.
exactly the way that Kurt phrased it. I think
Am
he
I still
suggested-
not saying it
No,
right?
you're saying it well. Point of clarification. I think what commission may also remove any volunteer officer from their position.
Right.
That's what I think it is. I don't
Yes.
think removing the,
Right, yes. Good.
I think that as far as if for some reason somebody here becomes so disruptive to the work of the commission, then maybe putting in a sentence that we can appeal to the board for removal of any members. And I would take away the with and without cause. It's like, if there is a reason that this person is so disruptive to the work of the committee that we can't work with them, then we need to appeal to the board to deal with it. And I would just leave it at that, not put any rules on what they have to do or how they would do it or when they'd have to do it.
Yeah, I would be okay with eliminating that piece only because the likelihood of it happening is not high, I hope and believe, based on our 3 meetings, that the chair's role, one of the roles of the chair, is to work with all of us to make sure that we're a team player and doing our jobs correctly. And if it got to that point, we could always revisit it and change the bylaws. But I don't, this is a 1-year, this is in several of the bylaws of advisory boards, but those are long-term, 4-year, 3-year terms. This is a 1-year term, which is less than 1 year now, type of thing. So I would just recommend that we remove it and just keep the officer piece of it in there and then move on.
I agree with that. I'm not
Yeah.
opposing it. Like I said, I crafted this from other examples.
Yeah.
I think you make a very good point about these other advisory boards are long-term, and, based on a couple meetings, it's clear there's a good vibe in the room here. I don't think we're ever going to have to resort to something like that. So I'm fine with taking that out.
So I believe what we're saying is we should remove the phrase, "any volunteer commission members or." So that it will now read, may also remove, leave any, remove any officer with or without cause.
From their position,
From their officer position, right? Yeah.
Is that agreeable to everyone as far as the phrasing?
Quick question, are we going to keep with or without cause? So we're removing with or without cause.
I think it can be. I mean, if 2/3 of the committee, commission, whatever we're calling ourselves, wants to get rid, sorry, I'm not in the mic here. Sorry, I think the with and without cause for an officer removal is fine, because if 2/3 of the group wants somebody to not be performing the role of vice chair, we'll pick of another one, then I think that's enough cause in and of itself to let the action proceed.
I think we should leave it. It's my experience in business that when you don't put with or without cause and you terminate someone, the next thing you know is you've got a lawsuit filed. You can't remove me from my job. You have to have cause. And I think it's simple here. We can remove them with or without cause. I really don't anticipate anybody here filing lawsuits, but the opposite, we don't know what's going to happen. So it doesn't hurt anything to leave with or without cause, in my opinion, as long as we take out the members and we're just removing the officers from the officer's position. Further discussion?
One clarification, should I add a sentence about appealing to the board for the hypothetical? No? Okay, good. All right, good. I had a note here and I want to make sure.
I do think that it's worth splitting the paragraphs, though, so that section 3 becomes section 3 and section 4, and then 4 and 5 bump down.
Yes, I'll take care of that.
So we kind of got away from the first of the two questions by concentrating on the second. Are we all right with someone being removed, or at least recommended removal, if they simply disappear and don't attend 3 meetings and don't bother to call in?
And also, it's without notice.
Right? That was what I meant by not call in, but yes, without notice to the chair or the secretary. I'm not seeing any further discussion on that. We're happy with that then, leaving that in.
Yeah, I did, I
Yeah.
made that, I made that change.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Further
do have,
points?
sorry. So is that 3 regularly scheduled meetings or 3 consecutively regular scheduled meetings?
It says consecutive regularly scheduled meetings.
Just want to make sure.
So if you miss 2, show up for 1, miss 2, show up for 1.
Good.
You're still in the good graces. Without notice. I would like to go to Article 6, Section 2, regular meetings. I'm not sure we want to lock ourselves into weekly Wednesdays because even when you looked at Brian's schedule, there were long gaps where we were taking public comment or where we were discussing the situation, where we were drafting. So I'm not sure we want to leave that in our bylaws and simply say we'll meet as scheduled, something like that. As scheduled and approved by a majority of the members. Discussion?
Could you please state the location of what you're talking about?
I'm sorry. Article 6, duties of the officers, Section 2, regular meetings. Am I on? No.
No, you're,
I got myself.
It's Article
I'm sorry. Article 7, meetings, Section 2.
We actually have 2 Article 7.
We have 2 Article 7s. It should be Article 8, yes.
right. Now we know why they get rid of the Roman numeral system. Because some idiots can't figure it out,
Oh,
like myself.
Article 8, Section 2, regular meetings. And we have the letters continuing from Section 1, so C becomes A, D becomes B. And so Article 8, Section 2, subsection A, shall conduct meetings as scheduled and approved by a majority of the members. Striking out once a week on Wednesdays and otherwise.
Got it.
Okay. Discussion on that? Anybody objecting? Okay. Records of the meetings, just a point. Section 5B, the commission shall make findings of fact states. Should be stating, something like that instead of states. Grammar, sorry about that, grammar police strike again.
No, it's good.
And then Article 9, Section 3, about the exception of the chair, we were going to strike that part, so each member shall be entitled to 1 vote.
Where was that? I'm sorry.
Article 9, Section 3. That was the bit about the chair not voting unless it was
Gotcha.
breaking a tie.
So strike with the exception of the chair.
Right. Right, from there to the end of the sentence.
That was the 75%.
Yeah, I had raised in Article 10, suggesting a 3/4 majority for amendments and just leave the board out of it.
Right. That makes sense to me.
I agree, the board isn't creating these bylaws, we are, so we should be able to amend them.
So I'll remove the reference to the board, which occurs twice within Article 10.
Yes.
And I'll replace it with commission. Got it.
Well, at least the first reference wouldn't make sense because we're not making a recommendation to ourselves.
Yes. Commission may.
So the commission may make amendments.
I got that.
Now, we're talking about a simple majority vote to change the bylaws. Is there any discussion on that? Any issue with that? Do you want to go supermajority instead of simple majority?
Yeah, I was suggesting 3/4.
Discussion?
I don't see much purpose. I mean, I could see a supermajority, you have to have 5 votes. But 3/4, you know, it's, I don't know. It's not a big issue to me, to be honest with you, Kurt.
Six would be a 2/3 vote, would be a
You
supermajority.
need 5 votes to do it. So if there's if there's 7 people here, you still need 5 votes.
Further discussion?
Which should it be? What did we come to consensus on? I kind of missed the thread.
How about a straw poll?
Okay, let's see a show of hands for simple majority. We have 5 for simple majority. That carries it. Dave, did you? No, did you get the names so that you can get it into the record?
Yeah, it was a straw poll.
Okay.
We're voting on the overall bylaws later.
No, we're not, this was not a vote on the bylaws, you're correct. Okay. So the commission may make amendments of these bylaws at duly noticed meetings by majority vote, provided that notice of proposed amendment is given to each member in writing at least 2 weeks prior to said meeting. The amendment shall become effective upon approval and adoption by the commission. Do I state that accurately? Brian, you're okay on that? You got that?
Yes.
Okay.
Got it.
Do we have any further discussion of this set of bylaws?
So Brian will go and make these revisions and then send it out to us.
Yeah. And then we
Okay.
can take up discussion and approval presumably next meeting.
I would assume so, since we've had the discussion now.
Yep.
I would assume approval will go fairly simply next week.
Can we get it on our agenda, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a reminder, bylaw approval, Idaho code, and communication strategies are the subjects for next week.
Point of clarification.
Certainly.
On the 9th then, on June 9th, are we doing the meeting then that was scheduled for the 2nd? Did we actually formalize that? We haven't come back to that yet. Okay.
We have not formalized it in an informal discussion on that subject. I don't believe we were formal on it. We were looking at, the one scheduled for the 2nd right now is inviting former commission members to speak. What we were going to try to do is to invite those former commission members, but remain fluid. If at next week's meeting, we do not seem to have any agreement from former commission members to come speak to us, we were going to flip the current county commissioners up into that position, invite them to come speak on the 9th. Let's see, yeah, invite them to come speak on the 9th, and then move the 97, 96, 97 commission down to not the 16th, since we won't be able to be here, but the 23rd. Or remove them entirely from the schedule, depending on what we decide.
Could we also consider, I don't know how many of the actual county commissioners from that 96, 97 time period are around who could perhaps tell us about their choice not to take the recommendations of the committee to a full vote? I'd like to include them in that invitation.
Makes sense to me? Sorry, I wasn't close enough. That makes sense to me if it makes sense to everyone else. Okay, so for the 2nd, we are firm on what we're going to put on the agenda. Do we hear discussion? I had suggested one of those was short and sweet, 2 of those could be involved. Do we have discussion on that issue? Do we want to spend a lot of time or a very little amount of time on the Idaho Code and communication strategies each?
I think the Idaho the communication strategy won't be a long time, but I think Nancy will provide us some direction, and maybe a follow-up could be, again, if we could do subcommittees and stuff like that, we may just get some concepts, maybe establish a subcommittee to come up and, like what Brian did, with a better, more detailed thing, and then bring it out for the next meeting. So I think that's less of a discussion than the other topic.
Nancy, I know we impose on you for all this as a volunteer. Is that agreeable to you? Okay. For those at home who couldn't hear that, Nancy just said yes. So, while we're staying fluid, we have 2 variations of the June 9th agenda, which we will determine on the 2nd which way to go based upon responses to our requests. Nancy, would you be willing to reach out to the commission members and to the former county commissioners to come to us on the 9th? If they cannot, then we would want to reverse that and invite the current county commissioners for the 9th and move that to the 23rd.
Absolutely. I can do that outreach. I know Commissioner Brooks, I'll speak with him tomorrow. He has spoken with, I believe it was Mike Anderson from the 96 group in the past. And I know I can contact Jerry Mason. So we've got at least those 2 as a good solid start. And I'll inform the group again later in the week as far as how I've come on locating the other people.
When I was reviewing the public comment through March 9th that's posted on our webpage, I noticed there was a somebody from the prior study commission who identified himself as a member of the prior commission that had made a comment. So presumably he is around somewhere.
Issues, discussion? I take it then that our flexible agenda for the 9th is set.
And I would just say, Chair, I'm looking at the list of previous commissioners. It looks like at that time period, Ron Rankin and possibly Dick Panabaker were both on the Board of Commissioners at that time, and both of those are still local, so I'll reach out to them as well.
Excellent. The one item on the agenda that I don't believe we've hit is the list of potential candidates for interviews. I believe we've already kind of covered this, although not strictly as an agenda item. We're talking about interviewing the current county commissioners. We're talking about interviewing the previous county commissioners from 96, 97. We're talking about interviewing the study commission members from the 96, 97 study commission. Brian has shown in his schedule, which we will not necessarily follow as far as dates are concerned, but we will follow as far as subject. He's shown interviewing the 6 row officials, interviewing their chief deputies, gathering information from them, from their departments, about what they do, how we can live without them, whether we need them to live. Is that amenable? Emra?
Yes, no, I find that's fine. My question is if there are other people that we would like to interview who could have something to add to this that aren't specifically within this parameter, how are we going to allow that? Are we going to then add them, and where would we add them? And what process would that be in order to have somebody not specifically listed here?
Let's set it right now. Anyone who has someone they want to add, bring them to a meeting, propose it as a motion, get a second, get a vote. If we get a majority vote, that person is added to the list.
Do we want to have a time
You have a
frame?
problem?
Yeah, I'm thinking that while none of us seem to have concerns about the the current officials that basically Brian's called out. I don't know that we should necessarily have everybody go through the process of moving for additional interviews. Perhaps we can collect a list of, from all the people here, of additional people that they would like to have come to the commission and to us, and why. And then we can look at it en masse rather than having to do this one-off at a time. Because I think there's going to be some degree of repetition. I don't think everybody's going to have complete originality and the people that they would want to see. And so having one consolidated list where we can look at it and then figure out how to schedule them in might be more efficient.
If we're talking about making a list and discussing the list en masse, yes. I think if we're talking about voting, we should vote individually. Rather than say, here's the list of 17 people, we're either going to take all 17 or none.
Yeah, fair.
We're going to vote each one of those individuals and decide whether we want to interview them. That's fine if we can bring up more than one person. I know that Kristen has already talked about forming a subcommittee and interviewing members of other governmental organizations, counties outside of Idaho that are using these various approaches. We've already got, I believe, the Coeur d'Alene City Council on this list that they use an administrator, city manager. So we're looking at various people outside the groups, and I am absolutely in favor of bringing in anybody who can contribute to an answer to these questions.
So do we have a time frame to add them? Because when somebody calls, how do we just say, hey, be on the alert for the phone call when we need you, come in? I'm just looking for a little bit more structure, I guess.
I
How
think
you want to proceed.
I think we can go with any time frame as long as we're still gathering information. Once we finished gathering information, we started the discussions, we started drafting, that's probably too late to invite somebody in
Oh, sure.
to
Well, I'm just,
discuss it.
do we want to add them
But
on?
as long as we're gathering information, I don't see any reason not to gather all the information we can. Kurt?
Could I suggest that we all try to put together a list of people that we know or roles, even if we don't know individuals, by, say, the middle of June? That gives us a couple of meetings, a couple of weeks from now. Ideally, it's who and why should we be interested in their input, I guess, would be the basic. And if we can assemble that, then we can all discuss it at some meeting and decide to move forward. Because I'm not convinced that we want to talk to this Coeur d'Alene City Council, for example. Even though it's on Brian's list, why not Post Falls, for example? Or why not both? So I think that just because it's on this list, beyond the elected officials and their deputies, I think we need to vote on all of them.
I don't necessarily disagree. I'll get to you in just a second, Joan. I don't necessarily disagree, but I don't want to set a fixed cutoff. If you haven't suggested somebody by the middle of June, forget it, we're not going to talk to them. Agreed. As long as we're still doing interviews, as long as we're still gathering information, if somebody suddenly pops up and says, you know, somebody just came back into town and they're here for 2 weeks, and maybe we can talk to them, I think we should do it. Agreed. Joan?
Yeah, I'd just like the commission to consider maybe interviewing the department heads within the county. I think we need to go a little bit deeper into the corporate structure.
I think that's fine, but again, let's make a list. And the only reason I suggested the middle of June is for a first tranche approach to try to help us be a little bit more effective or efficient and try to reduce duplication of effort.
Yeah, but I think it's impossible to know. It's possible to know who we may need to talk to as we go through this process. So I think that we also have to, if we interview somebody or get information on something, and that pops a question that we need answers to, like, you know, I still in the back of my mind believe the HR manager for the county is someone we need to talk to, because it's the 1996 or 7 plan was predicated on the assumption that they could hire people at a competitive rate that were going to stay over a period of time. So is that a true statement? So if we come up with a recommendation to add a permanent position, I would like to know what the feasibility and the market rate for that is, and because recommending something that is not fillable is not a good alternative either. So I think we're gonna learn, and I think that we should have a good highlight overview of what we want to talk to, and then let's just go with the flow. And if we come up with a question, we'll just go and get some additional people to come in during the information phase.
I like Joan's suggestion because I believe that, say, the county clerk, you have the clerk, you have the chief deputy, and then you have 3 department heads under that. I agree that interviewing those 3 department heads to find out what their jobs are, what is the chief deputy's job, and what is the county clerk's job, is important to us to decide this issue. Maybe we don't need a chief deputy. Maybe we need to break the county clerk into three divisions, because you've got 3 people under him right now, 3 department heads under him. So that's one of the questions we have to answer. Should the clerk's job be broken into 2 or 3 jobs? I believe it's the assessor's job is the other one that we are supposed to decide whether it should be broken. Having their department heads come in and talk to us will help us to make that kind of a decision. Open for further discussion.
Just clarification, what was the week that this room is closed? That we're not meeting in here?
June 14th, that week.
Our date is the
So
16th.
the 16th. So we're not having a meeting that week, or we will be in a different room?
We do
believe that
not, yeah, we do not have a large meeting room available. These rooms will be under construction that week.
Okay, so no
The only
meeting
thing we
and
could
then-
do is to meet upstairs in the old commissioner's meeting room, and we wouldn't be able to have public
So that's-
attending at that time. So it's probably better not to meet.
Okay, so we're,
When you say the public can't attend, do you mean we wouldn't have the video that we need for an open meeting?
We actually don't have to have the video for an open meeting. Technically, we could do that. The room is limited in capacity, which we haven't had a lot of public. So we could do that. Whether or not we could do the video would depend on, at some point in the construction process, they'll need the equipment down here. If they're not at that point yet, we technically could take it upstairs and do that. It's just a much smaller room, so that would be up to this group.
Okay.
While we can make a final decision on the 9th, I think it would be best to just anticipate we will not be meeting on the 16th. Further discussion? The last item on the agenda, do I have a motion to adjourn? We're only running an hour late.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Dave has made a motion, Kurt has seconded it. Call for a vote, show of hands. Looks unanimous to me. We are adjourned.